By 1937, Amelia Earhart was an international icon. She had already crossed the Atlantic solo, but she wanted to be the first female pilot to fly entirely around the globe. Previous successful circumnavigations stayed close to land, following a northern route. Earhart chose a path close to the equator. It was the longest possible route, demanding a final, brutal crossing over the full width of the Pacific Ocean. Her celebrity granted her access to the highest echelons of power. She was close friends with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, often taking her on private night flights over Washington. When bureaucratic red tape stalled her preparations, Earhart wrote directly to the White House. 4 days later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt personally approved emergency funds to clear a custom runway for her on a tiny Pacific speck called Howland Island. She had the backing of the U.S. government and a global fan base cheering her on. But once the wheels left the runway, none of that mattered. Her survival would depend entirely on her onboard technology and her own calculations. At 10 a.m. on a hot July day in 1937, Earhart taxied down a runway in Lae, New Guinea. It was a bustling hub for aviation and the starting point for the hardest leg of her journey. To make it across the Pacific, she had to remove everything unnecessary from her Lockheed Electra. She ripped out the insulation, left her extra clothes behind, replaced seats with massive fuel tanks, turning the aircraft into a flying gas can. Her destination was Howland Island, a flat sliver of coral and sand barely 2 kilometers long, hidden within millions of square miles of open ocean. The Electra's absolute maximum range in perfect weather was roughly 7,000 kilometers. The distance to Howland was nearly that far. A single miscalculation or unexpected weather would exhaust her fuel supply long before she saw land. For decades, the public has looked for paranormal or conspiratorial explanations for what happened next. But a close look at the technical data reveals a sequence of small, compounding failures that left her with no margin for error. Just 20 minutes after liftoff, the radio operators back in Lae detected a change in the weather. They broadcast an urgent warning to Earhart. She would be facing much stronger headwinds than anticipated. Earhart never acknowledged the message. Without knowing the true speed of the headwind, her estimates for how long the trip would take and how much fuel it would burn were compromised from the very beginning. The Electra was equipped with 5 distinct radio antennas, each designed for a specific frequency and task. Voice communications were handled by a V-shaped transmitting antenna on the roof and a separate receiving antenna mounted along the belly of the plane. Throughout the flight, Earhart successfully transmitted updates, but she ignored repeated calls from the ground. Investigators suspect her receiving belly antenna either malfunctioned or was physically torn off the plane as she bumped down the dirt runway in New Guinea. By losing the ability to hear inbound voice alerts, she was isolated. Her ground support network was trying to guide her, but she was flying completely deaf. 9 hours into the flight, Earhart's navigator, Fred Noonan, was doing the heavy lifting. He calculated their position using dead reckoning and celestial navigation, measuring the angles of stars above the horizon to keep them on course. But starlight wasn't their only guide. They had a technological backup. A ship called the Ontario was positioned halfway along the route. Earhart planned to use her plane's circular loop antenna to pick up a Morse code signal from the ship and hone in on its exact location. The day before takeoff, Earhart realized the Ontario couldn't receive high-frequency voice signals. She sent an urgent telegram asking them to broadcast a specific Morse code pattern instead, but the telegram arrived too late. The ship's crew never knew she needed the signal.
Earhart listened for the code, but heard only static. Unable to communicate, the Electra flew blindly past its midpoint verification. Without a precise radio fix to reset their coordinates, the small navigation errors inherent in dead reckoning began to multiply. Passing the Ontario in silence marked the point of no return. Adrift in the vast Pacific Ocean, they had no way to verify their trajectory until they reached Howland Island. The final failsafe was the Itasca, a Coast Guard ship stationed at Howland Island. As Earhart approached the area, she tried desperately to establish contact and request a directional bearing, but a massive administrative failure was unfolding. Earhart was using Greenwich Civil Time, the Itasca was operating on their local ship time, and Howland Island itself ran on a third time zone. None of their clocks were aligned. Earhart set specific schedules for when she would talk and when she would listen, because she could only power one antenna at a time. Because their clocks were mismatched, the Itasca frequently broadcasted at the exact moment Earhart was talking, effectively blocking her signals. Even when they did connect, a misunderstanding about physics sealed Earhart's fate. Before the flight, a radio expert suggested the Itasca transmit on a low frequency of 400 kilohertz. Earhart misunderstood and requested a high frequency of 7,500 kilohertz instead. This diagram shows how high-frequency radio waves behave over long distances. Instead of traveling in a straight line, they interact with free electrons in the upper atmosphere. The waves skip and bounce between the ocean and the ionosphere, scattering in every direction. Because the signal from the Itasca was scattering and hitting her plane from everywhere at once, Earhart's directional loop antenna was useless. It relies on finding a null, a precise point of silence that indicates the direction of the source. With waves bouncing in from all sides, the signal never dropped out. The Itasca was aware of her radio direction finding limits, but the commander followed her request for the high frequency without correction. This choice left her with a signal she could hear, but one she physically could not use to find her way home. At 8:43 a.m., the situation in the Electra was critical. Earhart and Noonan had been flying for over 20 hours. Blinded by the glare of the morning sun and deafened by the relentless roar of the engines, they watched their fuel gauges drop toward zero. Her voice burst through the Itasca speakers one last time. She reported that they were running on a north-south search line, 157-337, desperately flying back and forth in a grid pattern, hoping to spot a sliver of land. In the cockpit, she was twisting the dial of her loop antenna, listening to the stutter-stop of the Itasca's Morse code. She waited for the signal to drop out and point the way home, but she heard only a steady, omnidirectional drone. In this final transmission, we hear a pilot realizing her technology has completely failed her. There was no mystery left, only the engine roar and the rising sun. The United States launched an unprecedented rescue operation, spending $4 million to scour the ocean. When they found nothing, decades of speculation followed, filling the void with conspiracy theories about secret missions and paranormal events. But the documented timeline indicates a much simpler end. After hours of searching for a target she could not see, the Electra likely exhausted its fuel and descended into the water. The tragedy was entirely preventable. She had survived ocean crossings before, but this final flight proved that ambition and courage cannot outrun a lack of technical knowledge and a breakdown in shared responsibility. We now have a precise understanding of the physics that doomed the Lockheed Electra. But despite knowing how and why she fell from the sky, the Pacific Ocean jealously guards the final resting place of aviation's greatest pioneer.